Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Hollow Pursuits, which is episode 21 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the third season episode, Hollow Pursuits. So Hollow Pursuits is the episode in which the Enterprise crew is dealing with a nervous engineer named Reginald Barclay, and Barclay in his free time is making holograms on the holodecks of his fellow crew members, in which he plays out fantasies of being superior to them and getting the better of them, sometimes in sword fights. And Picard makes it Geordi's project to get to know Barclay, to make him feel part of a crew, to help improve his performance rather than simply just transferring him off. So Geordi does his best attempt to make friends with Barclay, but he soon discovers his abnormal holodeck programs, but decides to keep it to himself and tries to help Barclay in this crisis in which a lot of random Enterprise functions just start malfunctioning for no apparent reason. However, things come to a head when Riker, Troy, and LaForge go into his weird holodeck program, where Riker is furious to see a recreation of him as a short, annoying, obnoxious, and useless sword fighter. And Troy then sees the recreation of her as the goddess of empathy, where he is obviously sexualizing her. And both of them are furious, but Geordi takes Barclay away so they can help solve the problem, which is becoming critical as the ship is at high warp and accelerating faster, and there's no way to bring it out of warp because some of the systems have locked. However, with Barclay's help, Geordi does discover the problem with the malfunctions and what's causing it, and they're able to come up with the solution and save the ship. So Barclay then says goodbye to the crew as he's decided to transfer off the ship, but then you learn that that's not actually the crew, it's another holodeck program, which he ends and then deletes all of his programs except for one, hinting that he is no longer going to indulge in the holodeck as much anymore. So I'm very iffy on this episode. I know I don't want to speak for my sister, but I have a recollection of her not liking this episode and of not liking Reginald Barclay. I didn't hate this episode that much, but I was sort of, I don't know, I was sort of polarized on it. I was sort of up and down on this episode, because the thing is, like, so while I was watching it just now, I was like, oh, when I first started watching this episode, I'm like, oh, I'm giving this a 5 out of 10 because it's just it's probably going to be the only episode in season 3 that gets a negative rating, because this is just, particularly when it starts out with the holodeck programs where Barclay is like, oh, I'm the badass, and oh, here's to insubordination, and kicks Riker's ass. He goes up and kisses Troy, and then we find out, it's just a holodeck, and in real life he's like all nervous and hides behind canisters and whatnot, and Geordi and Riker like yell at him, being Mr. Barclay is unacceptable, which seems kind of out of character for them a little bit. But anyway, all that I found really, really fucking goofy, and I was like, yeah, I'm thinking I'm giving this episode a 5. But then they have stuff with like Picard saying, no, we need to give this guy a shot, and Geordi, you're going to make friends with him, and Geordi like talks to Guinan, it's like how best to do this, and Guinan sticks up for Barclay, and so Geordi eventually makes friends with him, and I was like, no, this is really good, I'm going to give it a 7. And then they do that more stupid holodeck shenanigans with like Wesley like being this annoying like spoiled brat, and Barkley sleeping on Crusher's lap, and like them being the stupid sword fighters and whatnot. And I was like, no, this deserves a 6. But then the episode ends with like Jordy like really making Barkley feel better, and I was like, oh well, no, this deserves a 7. And then the episode ends with that stupid holodeck where Barkley's saying goodbye to the crew, which is a fucking hologram program. They try to, they definitely try to fake you out and make you think it's not a holodeck program. It's very obviously a holodeck program. And I was like, well, that's stupid. Maybe I'll give this a 6. But anyway, I will come to a decision at the end of this episode. I will finally tell where I land, but I was very up and down with this episode. So yeah, I don't have that many positive feelings about this, because I don't hate Barkley the way I believe my sister does, but I'm not a huge fan of him either. I know that I've watched some other YouTube videos and seen some other YouTubers and other reviewers who love Barkley, who thinks he's the best character ever, and I definitely don't feel that way. I don't really have anything against him either. I don't think like he's absolutely terrible. Like, I know some people think that he's unbelievable and there's no way he would make it in the Starfleet and there's no way he would make it on the Enterprise. I am not so sure I agree with all that. I can kind of, because he's a brilliant engineer. He's just a little, got anxiety and some, anxiety issues, and is sort of has phobia. We learn in the show later on he has even more phobias. And I think the character journey he goes on throughout the Next Generation of overcoming those phobias and becoming more and more liked and more a part of the crew, I think was actually really good. I think it's a highlight of the show. Again, I don't love this character. I think he's amazing, but I don't think he sucks either. I think he was decent. He was a decent reoccurring character, and I like that they had a reoccurring character. Just the fact that they had one made me happy. But yeah, I disagree with those videos that hold him up as like the best character ever, and he's awesome. And by the way, I don't like him in Voyager at all. I don't think they should have put him in Voyager, and it pisses me off to this day that they were acting like he was a main character in the finale of Voyager, where he barely fucking appeared in Voyager. He's a TNG character. Why do people complain about the Enterprise finale of, oh, this has TNG characters, but they don't seem to give a shit that they were treating Barkley like a main character out of fucking nowhere, like he was a part of the Voyager crew in that finale. That is worse. That whole finale is like a billion times worse than the Enterprise finale. I can't understand why people harp on the Enterprise finale, which is just mediocre at best, and ignore the blatant bullshit. I mean, out of the many examples treating the Borg Queen like a fucking Scooby-Doo villain and having... Alright, okay. Sorry. And having that time travel bullshit with Janeway traveling back to fucking... change everything just because their good friends are about to die. Fuck all the other people who already died on Voyager. Screw anyway, sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't bring up Endgame because that sends me into fits of rage. As you can see, I fucking hate that episode. I hate it. It's the worst series finale of all time. But anyway, not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about Hollow Pursuits. So, let me start with what I really liked about this episode. What really holds it up for me is the whole thing about the whole storyline with Geordi not liking Barkley at first and like really hating him and doesn't even want to be around him, but because he's ordered by Picard to sort of become his best friend, or just to sort of make him feel part of the crew. And at first he's very resistant to this assignment, but eventually he does become friends with Barkley. In fact, this continue, and again, I love the continuity. I love this continues on for episodes to come, that they remain good friends. And I think that was a good character story. And so this, for me, this holds up, prevents this episode from sucking, or for at least being not, maybe not sucking, but from at least being like a 5 or a 4. Because I think if it was just the holodeck shenanigans, then I probably would give it a 5 or a 4. But the character story, like, first of all, I love how Picard is not willing to just pawn off the problem onto someone else. Like Riker and Geordi go to him as like, can you please transfer this guy off the ship? And I can understand, to be fair to Geordi and Riker, definitely understand their point of view, because the Enterprise is the flagship. It's the cream of the crop. Is, you're supposed to be the best and the best, and to have someone who is constantly late and has poor work performance and doesn't get along with anyone, seems like he doesn't deserve to be on a ship that is the best of the best. But that just makes me admire Picard's decision even more, that he had the gumption enough to just be like, no, we're not going to just pawn off this problem on someone else. We're actually, if there's a good officer in there, we're going to bring it out. We're going to bring out the best in him, and we're going to make this work. And I think that was very admirable, and it does show how awesome a captain Picard is. I couldn't imagine Jellicoe doing that. He would just if Data, because Riker would never be his first officer, Data would be his first officer. Data went to Jellicoe and was like, oh yes, this officer is a problem officer. He's all constantly late and he's feeling very nervous, and I want to transfer off the ship. Jellicoe would immediately say, here, give me that pad and sign it and get it done, transfer him. And Jellicoe sucks. Anyway, sorry, he's a terrible captain. Anyway, but Picard is much better. He's a much better captain. He's not willing to do that. He's going to be like, no. We're not just going to pawn him off on someone else so he can fail there as well. We're going to head on this problem. We're going to face this problem head on. Now, honestly, since they mentioned that he had anxiety and was difficult to be around, I think Picard should have then and there ordered Barkley to see Counselor Troy. I think it was a bit silly that they waited for this. But so he tells Geordi, to make him your best friend. He's like, with all due respect, my best friend, I can't even stand to be around the guy. And then Picard, very rightfully, again, being a very good captain, is like, you're just going to have to put your personal feelings aside for the benefit of the crew. Because this isn't like, it's not like a job. It's not like you're working at a restaurant and you can just, this employee is a problem, so we'll just fire him and he'll go work at the restaurant down the street. This is a starship in space for the most part. It was an enclosed community. Now, granted, they can go to star bases and they can get transferred to other ships, but still, that's more of a bigger process than just moving down to the Starbucks down the street. It's because you're in an enclosed community, and that's especially what the Enterprise is seen as being. A lot of people, Enterprise D, a lot of people refer to it as an apartment complex in space. And so I love that Picard is like, no, we're gonna actually make him better. We're going to improve him rather than just pawning him off on someone else. And so Geordi, of course, is doesn't like this assignment. But he does his best. You can tell that he's immediately softer with Barkley. Barkley is expecting Geordi to bark at him and ram down his throat. But Geordi is like, oh, fine, yeah, sure, whenever. That's all good. And that brings out the best in him. And so I like that personally, because I think that is, granted, everyone has different styles of learning. And for me, I love the message that is how you cultivate someone with positive reinforcement, with instead of like barking orders at them and yelling at them for every mistake they make. Apparently, I've met some people who like that form of teaching, who's like, yes, it toughens you up, it gets you. But I've had teachers before who would just berate me and yell at me, and like, how is this like helping me? It's not helping me at all. It's just making me feel worse about what I'm doing, and it's causing me mental anguish, and I'm not going to perform better because of this. I'm just going to be frightened and scared. But if someone comes to me and is like, look, do you need help with this? I can help. I'll show you how to do this, and praise me when I do a good job. No, that's good. You're doing well. I improve. I do way much better. And I've had arguments with other people and that's probably why I hate Jellicoe, by the way. But I've had arguments with people like, oh, no, that's actually not the good way to do it. He's too soft. Like I had this teacher at film school who was helping me edit, and he was so helpful because he always reinforced the positives. Like, oh, you did a really good job there, but maybe you can improve there. And then there was this other teacher I had who was a script supervisor who tore my script to shreds, basically pointing out how incredibly flawed it was, but he did it in such a way that I felt good about myself at the end of it. I was like, wow, that's amazing. This is the best advice I ever got. And he basically said my script, which I thought was a masterpiece, was a piece of shit. But it made me feel good about it. And so those are the good kind of mentors. I think that's how the best kind of teaching. And I love how this episode really reinforces that. The episode, shows Geordi and Riker yelling at him, jumping down his throat. It's like, this is the last time you're late, Mr. Barkley. And it shows he's not going to improve. Like, if they continue doing that, then no, he wouldn't improve. He would just keep going in the holodeck. He would feel this mental. He is definitely damaging him mentally. He had mental anguish over that, or it increased his anxiety and his sort of mental issues, and so his performance would have kept dropping. And I love that Picard was the one to recognize that no, that is not the right approach to take, and no, we're not just going to pawn him off on someone else. Best approach is to build his confidence, make friends with them. And then so Geordi goes there, and instead of jumping down his throat, he's like reinforcing. He's like, oh, good job, Barkley. Yes, yeah, no, that's fine, Reg, whatever you want to do, that's all good. And he immediately changed his attitude, and immediately Barkley got better. And I love that. Now, granted, as I said, maybe different people take different stylish approaches. Maybe it's people who are prone more to antisocial or high anxiety behavior that softer approach is definitely much better for. And maybe there's the hard ass or whatever who prefers the hard ass approach. But I do love that about this episode. And I love the character story with Geordi, that it really was, because he had to talk to Guinan. And I love that conversation with Guinan, how Guinan stuck up for Barkley and compared it to her uncle that nobody else liked. And I love the line. It was such a good line where, Geordi is like, oh, he's constantly late and he messes up his, assignments, and nobody wants to be around him. And she was like, well, if I knew no one wanted to be around me, I'd probably be late and mess up my assignments too. And I'm like, that's fucking awesome. That's a good point. And I like how they have that engineering meeting, and Barkley shows up and he's being all nervous and like stumbling on his words when he's presenting his case, and taking much longer to do it. And they show a close up of that Duffy, guess McDuffie or whatever he is, who's only in this episode, like just looking like, oh god damn, just losing patience with Barkley, and how Barkley would notice that, and it makes him even more nervous. But Geordi doesn't react that way. He decides to be reinforcing and reinforces, like, thanks for your report, Reg. Keep up the good work, and and here's another assignment for you to do, and sort of building his confidence. And I fucking love that. I think that's really good. And I love how they become good friends. And I love how Barkley, even towards the end of the episode, he even says, like, none of you were real to me. You were all just, like, the holodeck, people in the holodeck, the characters I create in the holodeck were more real to me than anyone out here. But now it's not that way anymore, at least with you. It says that to Geordi. And, like, that really got me right here. Like, it shows the power of sort of positive reinforcement. And I think it was a great character journey for Geordi to go on, from going through, I fucking hate this guy, I want him off my ship, to actually becoming friends and seeing his point of view. It was such a positive portrayal of Geordi that I think is one of the better portrayals of Geordi that the show has done. And how towards the end, like, he actually helped solve the problem, and he figured out the mystery, and I like how Riker or Picard was like, "Well done, Mr. LaForge," and Geordi's response was, "Mr. Barkley and I thank you." And then Riker's response, "Understood," because he's still pissed off at Broccoli, but did I say Broccoli? I did a Picard. But anyway, he's still pissed off at Barkley, but he had to acknowledge that, yeah, this guy saved the ship. But I suppose I could talk about that Broccoli thing since I made that mistake. That was also a nice little touch. And I think it makes sense. This is showing Wesley being a 17-year-old little twerp, which I like. I like when they portray him as a 17-year-old and not a super genius who saves the universe on a regular basis. And here he's more of a 17-year-old, and he comes up with this juvenile running nickname of Barkley that caught on. And I like that Picard is like this. He's like, no, let's just unstick this, shall we? And then later when Geordi is talking to the fellow engineers and it comes up again, he's like, Data's like, I don't understand this nickname. This isn't a nickname to, usually to devote like good feelings and friendship. And Geordi's like, yeah, Data's right, which I don't think that was his point, but he kind of made it anyway. And he's like, Data's right. This nickname ends right here now, Captain's orders. Like, again, this is not a great Geordi moment. But then, of course, the funniest moment, and I do admit this is a really funny moment, where Picard accidentally says, it was like, good work. I look forward to your report, Mr. Broccoli. And then everyone just looks at him. He's like, Barkley. And you can tell that that's the first time Barkley ever heard anyone, because no one's ever called it to his face before. I like how mortified Picard was that he slipped up that badly, and the Data is saying, "Oh, it's a common mistake, sir. Changing Brock to Bach," and that Picard just like ignored him, and Data's just like stopped and went back to what he was doing. It was good comedic timing. I think yeah, that was definitely a funny part of the episode that really worked. Now, to get what I didn't like about this episode. Oh, before I get into what I didn't like, sorry, I have another thing to say about what I did like. And I liked how the threat of the week, to me, it was, let's say, the A plot and B plot. Let's say the A plot's Barkley and the B plot is the ship malfunctioning. They were interwoven very well. Like, they didn't feel like two separate plots. They had to, like, the whole ship malfunctioning really tied into the Barkley thing, and they really did a nice job with that. And I think, I've been noticing that Season 3 has been doing that a lot, that Season 3 is actually really good at intermixing both A plot and B plot and not making it seem like two rigid separate things where the B plot's just there to fill up time and, oh, there's got to be some weird thread or whatever while we do our character story. which is what they will do in season 4 and 5, especially season 5. And they'll do that on Voyager a lot, and maybe even a couple times in season 6 and 7. But it's mainly a season 4 and 5 thing. I think especially season 5. I just have a memory of season 5 doing this a fucking lot. And in that case, the plots are very rigid and have nothing to do with each other. And so that's why I disagree with Michael Piller and some of the other writers who said that the show improved in season 4. I actually very strongly disagree with that. I can see why going through season 3, why it's my favorite season of the entire show. In fact, the entire Star Trek franchise. Because I really do think they do things better in this season. And then season 4... it's still a good season, don't get me wrong. It's still a great season. But a lot of more of these issues, like the over-reliance on technobabble, for example. Like, they have a lot of technobabble in this episode, but it never really got annoying or distracting. At least for me, because they focused more on the... what does it mean for the characters? Like, I think this even is better even than Booby Trap. Well, it's definitely better than Booby Trap, because in Booby Trap, Geordi was in the holodeck fucking around with the hologram where he should have been working with his team. In this episode, he does work with a team, and it was great seeing him as, you know, the chief engineer, in charge of an engineering team, and giving his team orders and working with his teams. Like, okay, team, we need solutions. Like, that's good, and that's what he should have been doing in Booby Trap as well. And it was great to see it here. Okay, so now let me get into what I don't like, and as you could probably guess, because I've avoided talking about it so far for the most part, the whole holodeck thing. I mean, I didn't totally hate it, but like, I wouldn't give it like a 1 or whatever, but I wasn't a fan. And it just seemed to be goofy to me, and then it brings up a lot of morality or security questions involving the holodeck. I mean, chief among them, something that everyone brings up, is there no way to lock the holodeck? Or at least, like, alert the user when someone else enters? Because it seems like some people, now just leaving the sex stuff aside, because I know there's tons of jokes and stuff about Riker going to holodeck to have lots of sex, which, does he really need to do that since he has sex with every single visiting alien? I don't think he does. But regardless, maybe he does anyway. I don't know, but that's beside the point. Leaving the sex stuff completely aside, just shoving that to the side. Some people could be running holodeck programs that are personal. Like, even, let's give an example that's very non-sexual. Worf, for example. He was doing the calisthenics thing where he was fighting Skeletor with Riker. And he said to Riker, is like, oh, you know, that program... is that the most difficult you can do? And Worf's like, no, Commander, I do much more difficult programs, but those programs are too personal to share. So what if some random person walked in the holodeck when he was in the middle of these personal fighting things? How would that make him feel? And of course, by the way, I had to mention the fact that he actually did have sex on the holodeck with Kayla. What if someone just walked in the middle of that? I mean, there should be some sort of notification, some sort of protocol, some sort of beep. I mean, is there no fucking locks on the goddamn doors? Yeah, because people could be doing... Again, let's leave aside the sex stuff. They could be doing things that of a personal nature. Like, for example, when Wesley was talking to a hologram of his father, that was very personal. Or some random person walked in on him and was standing back there eating popcorn while he's having this personal moment with his dead father. That would seem to be very inconsiderate. So, there should be locks. Or there should be some sort of protocol. Now, I would grant it that senior officers like LaForge and Troy could have override codes to override a lock. But that's not what happened in this episode. They didn't override the lock. And plus, I think Geordi was being very inconsiderate. Granted, he was trying to make his presence known. He was saying, Reg, calling out to him. But why didn't he, tap his comm badge and be like, LaForge to Reginald Barkley? Because in the first instance, Barkley was awake. He was fighting the, musketeers or whatever. He would have heard Geordi's comm badge. Or if he didn't even have his comm badge on, he's in the holodeck, so Geordi could say, computer tap me into holodeck 3 and be like, Reg, and then his voice would come over in the loudspeaker or whatever in the holodeck, and he'd be like, oh yes, Mr. LaForge. But of course they didn't do that for plot contrivance, because they wanted Geordi to walk in on Reg and see all those, the different versions of Data, Picard, and Geordi. Now, and the other thing that bothered me about these holodeck programs before I'm getting off topic, let me stick with the locks. Because in the second part where LaForge, Troy, and Riker go in, LaForge knows that Barkley's recreating people and that could piss some people off. I don't think he didn't see the one at Troy at this point, to be fair. So maybe when he invited Counselor Troy to come with him, that's, he didn't think that there would be a version of her. But it still seems like a very gross invasion of privacy to invite Troy and to be okay with Riker coming in to invade Barkley's private space. And it seems like Riker was out of line too for invading his private space in the holodeck to just burst in there. Who gives a shit that he's late for his shift? I mean, there's got to be, I know he was sleeping in this one, but still there's got to be a better way to get a hold of him than just bursting into his space. I don't know. That's just me. But yeah. Now I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say earlier about the holodecks. But anyway, so yes. And the other thing that Riker was going to say, when he saw that Barkley was recreating... Oh, I remember what I was going to say about the holodecks, so let me get it out before I forget. Why is Barkley only recreating senior staff members? And of course, we know the real reason for that. Because they're main characters, they're the main cast on this TV show. That's why. But really, in the universe, that doesn't really make any sense. For one thing, I found it weird that he recreated Data as one of the bad guys, sword fighting, because Data was never mean to him. Data was actually nice to him, because Data even pointed out at one stage, oh, this is Barkley's idea, praising him for doing a good job. And so it didn't really make sense to me that he would feel threatened by Data, just because he was a senior officer. And then, he recreated Troy, which I don't think he had that much interaction with her because he wasn't being counseled by her at this stage. And Crusher, which, again, he would have very little interaction with her. So why it would have made more sense for him to recreate the engineering staff, the people who he actually did have interactions with on a regular basis. Maybe that Duffy guy was being a bit of a dick to him, or O'Brien might have said something to piss him off. So that would have made way more sense. But of course, you have to have the main cast members of the show, and that's why they did it, which I think that's kind of dumb. And so so the other thing with Riker saying, when he found out that Barkley was recreating members of the crew, and Riker said, this is against regulations, and Troy's like, actually, there's no regulation about this, and Riker's like, there should be. This creates a very interesting philosophical discussion. Should it be allowed for them to just recreate people who they work with on a regular basis and change their personality and have fantasies where, we don't know how far Barkley went with Troy. Maybe off screen it went a bit further. And that seems like that should be breaking some sort of law. That seems like that should be against some sort of regulations. It's like deep fake porns, for example. That's very, and even like you could bring it up to Jennifer Lawrence and the stuff that happened with her leak sex tapes and leaked news, and they were hacked, and it's not something that she wanted to make public, and she equated people watching them to a form of rape, because they were invaded, because she didn't consent to them to see these intimate images of her. So it seems like that same concept would apply to recreating people in the holodeck to make out with them, even if you don't have sex with them, theoretically. Just what we've seen with Barkley, like having these fantasies of kissing and making out with them. That seems like, especially if they did see them naked and sort of have sex with them, it seems like that would be a huge violation of privacy, and it should be against some sort of law, doesn't it? Like, I think it does. But when you get into the stuff with just like Barkley doing, like, shoving Riker around in 10 forward, or doing sword fights with images of his superior officers to blow off some steam, then it gets a bit more murky. I mean, if that's against the regulations to recreate images of your crewmates because it's just weird, then could he recreate images of people he knew from his childhood, or people he knew from Earth, or maybe other people in Starfleet that pissed him off that just don't happen to be serving on the same ship as him? Would that be okay? And if that's not okay, then can you recreate images of anyone? Is it against the law to recreate images of anyone, even if you're doing it for just, you want to hang out in the bridge with Worf and fight some Romulans? But no, that's against the rules. So it gets murky, and I don't really know, like, the correct answer. I think, personally, like, I would draw the line with anything being sexual. But then, again, how would you police that is the question. Maybe you could have, this is a futuristic computer, you could have it built, it like has a security system, or a locked sort of access system, so where Barkley could say, computer, recreate Counselor Troy, and so they recreate her, and they're like, computer, make her want to fall in love with me and have sex with me, and the computer would be, access denied, this is against civil rules or whatever. And even if they asked like Troy to like kiss him or whatever, it'd be access denied. Like, you could have security systems that way. So to me, that would make the most sense. That I think it would be okay. But then there's a question of murdering. What if you want to go in there and like murder and like torture? What if you want to like do like the Saw movies to like Riker and have like big knives and like carve his body up and shit? Like, that's some twisted shit. I think that should also fall in lines with the computer alerting, being like access denied, and then they should alert the senior officers, hey, this guy's doing some pretty fucked up shit. He might need like to be watched, or he might need some counseling or some mental help or something like that. So I think the way that it was portrayed in this episode was, this episode's acting like holodecks were like a brand new thing, which maybe to some extent what we know of the show there are, but it seems like a lot of these things, these rules should be established already. And that brings me to another complaint I had with Troy and the whole counseling scene that Barkley had with her, and he was just acting all weird and being like, oh yes, in and out, and he just leaves. And Troy goes to Riker and it's like, I had the most bizarre session with one of your engineers, and he's like, oh, let me guess, Barkley. And he's like, what happened? Did he get any help? And she's like, I don't even know what happened. Does it feel like she's breaking some sort of confidentiality rule by talking to Geordi about Barkley's personal session? I mean, you could argue that LaForge is a senior officer. He's his senior officer, and Troy is only telling... She didn't get into any specifics because, to be fair, there were no specifics to get into. But She didn't get into any specifics. She was just generally talking about his well-being. So that does seem like in the realm of what's acceptable to talk about with another senior officer who is his direct superior. So actually, ultimately, I am okay with that. But let me talk about the ending. The ending is what I really didn't like. Now, the part with Barclay helping LaForge solve the, crisis of the ship going too fast, that I did like. Like, that was good. I had no issue with that. What I didn't like was the fact that, so we see Riker and Troy and LaForge go on the holodeck. They see all the shit Barclay's been doing. They're fucking pissed. They leave the holodeck, and Riker is like, Barclay, whatever, just glaring at him, and Troy says, we're going to have a little chat, Barclay. But then they're called to engineering, and Geordi's like, oh, I got to take Barclay away. And they're like, we're going to fucking rim you. We're fucking pissed. And then so they go save the day. And then they have a scene at the end where Barclay's talking to what's very obviously a fake holodeck crew, saying goodbye to them, and then the episode ends. What? We didn't see the resolution of what Troy would say. Troy and Riker would say to Barclay. I mean, granted, he saved the ship. Good for him, but that doesn't change the fact that they're still fucking pissed at him, especially Troy, to see how her image was used. And maybe it's a good fucking question of whether or not he did sexually violate her image. But we didn't get to see this. It was cut short. Instead, we got the stupid fake bridge, which I hated that scene. I'm sorry, I hated that. I thought it was a terrible way to end the episode. I mean, it's supposed to be him moving on because he says to delete the programs. Sure, fine, whatever. But you could have had a counseling session with him and Troy, where Troy came to actually help him and make him decide to delete the programs. I think that would have been way better. I think it's bullshit that we never actually got resolution. Just ended right there without resolving how Riker and Troy were pissed off with him, and just in the next season when he appears again, that was a year ago, completely forgotten. They've moved on since then. They're perfectly okay with Barclay. Well, that's kind of dumb. I wanted to see their direct reactions to seeing what he was doing, so I felt robbed of that, and I think it was a bad ending. That whole scene where he's on the holodeck, I'm saying goodbye to the crew, and it's so obvious it's a holodeck. That was a stupid ending. I really didn't like that. Anyway, I do feel like I need to bring up the D Space Nine episode Meridian, their B plot, which does touch on some of these same issues with recreating real people for the purposes of sex, because Quark has the holosuites, which at least in the earlier seasons was used predominantly for sex, which is why they're called suites. In the later seasons they turned it into baseball things and fucking 50s lounge singers who pissed me off, but at first it was supposed to be about going in there having sex with holograms. So it actually makes sense that would be a sort of commodity that the Ferengis would sell. Boy, I would hate to be the one who has to clean up those holosuites. But anyway, that's another topic. Anyway, I think it would be worse than the lower deckers having to clean up the holodecks. But anyway, in that episode, they had Jeffrey Combs playing this alien who purposely wanted an image of Major Kira so he could have sex with her. And there was this whole controversy about it. And Quark was trying to take an image of Kira. And he came up with this lie saying, oh, no, it's just so people can go out and play a fantasy with be on the ops and work with you in the bridge. And Kira's like, well, if they want to come work with me, tell them to enlist in the Bajoran militia. That way I can make sure everyone has their clothes on. So in this case, they're making unlike Hollow Pursuits, they make a very clear-cut line that absolutely you cannot use the image of real life people. I don't care if you say it's not for sexual purposes. That doesn't matter because, well, in this case, they knew it was and they were right. And maybe that has more to do with the fact that these were hollow suites instead of hollow decks. Sure, that could have something to do with it because that's the main function of the hollow suite. But yeah, that does seem weird that you have a whole holodeck and the only thing you're going to use it for is to have sex. It seems like people should be using it for other things, which does eventually happen. But as I said, that wasn't the original idea. But anyway, yeah, it seems... So there they drew a line. And again, I'm not sure. I think my idea of having security protocols to make, so you can use the image of someone, but if the moment you try to use it for something like sexual or like to murder them gruesomely or some bullshit or some twisted sick shit, then there would be lockouts that prevent you from doing that and alert the authorities, hey, they're trying to do some weird shit on here. So that, I think, would make more sense. But then again, on Deep Space Nine, it's a different scenario because they don't really control the hollow suites. That's more of that seems more independent of something Quark controls. So then that does kind of make sense that they would just flat out refuse or deny him the ability to do that. But, yeah. Anyway, I'd like to thank those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does really help my channel, help me grow. I'm very thankful for all those who support me on Patreon. So I'll just give a quick shout out to Antarius, Tatson. Hold on. Let me refresh my list. Sorry. Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelasero, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Nealhouse. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I really enjoyed the mystery of this episode, and the holodeck part was okay. Now, we got into the main reason for this episode. Barclay is portrayed in this episode of just being shy and socially awkward around other people. I would agree with some parts of this, just being shy and awkward. However, I think the episode may have another hidden message that Barclay is a shy, awkward alcoholic. The scenes in engineering for me feels more that Barclay is still drunk and not shy. Speaking from experience, if this was me, I would wait till near the end of the meeting to say something unless someone else already made the point I was going to mention. I think an alcoholic would mumble like he did during these scenes, his words and being late all the time. Yet again, I can't speak for every person like this, only myself, as no one really knows what people are going through. The nickname that Wesley gave Barclay in Hollow Pursuits is awful. They all say it, even Picard. Well, to be fair, Picard slipped up. He didn't mean to say it. But anyway, I thought people in the 24th century were beyond that. Thank you, Data, for pointing this out. Riker should have been the one who stopped the nickname straight away, as he is second in command of the Enterprise. I can't wait for some episodes now. Let's get into the modern haters for Star Trek, except Picard Season 3. I wonder why. And almost everything else in TV and movies. It's all bullshit. Everything I see them complain about and cry about, I've seen it before in TV shows and movies in the 80s and 90s. My rating is a 7 out of 10. To be fair, I don't think the nickname is that bad. I mean, the fact that they had a nickname that was derogatory, like Broccoli, it was more juvenile and silly. And Picard, to be fair, he was the one who put the stop to it. He said Riker should have. And I think Riker was portrayed more of a dick in this episode, but Picard did. He said, let's make sure this unsticks. And then Geordi then backed him up and said, Captain's orders, no more nickname. But the thing is, their nickname could have been worse. Like, just calling him Broccoli is that's kind of juvenile. but they could call him like dumbass or shitty engineer or something like that, or big dickhead. Like those would be more derogatory, something like that. I think it would be way worse than just simply broccoli. But that's, they could be implying he's a vegetable, though. So I guess you could draw it to be something worse, but it's still, to me, not as bad as calling him dumb fuck dickhead. Like, that would be worse, in my opinion. Anyway, so that's a very interesting theory about being an alcoholic. And I would say that probably could apply. Like, I think you make a very valid point about how this behavior could fall into someone who's alcoholic. I would just say that I would just go by what the episode's telling me, because a lot of times I don't think episodes are lying to me. And if they say, and maybe they're just not portraying it the best way, if they say that his problem is anxiety and being antisocial, I buy it. And plus, and you were, speaking of personal experience, but let me get into my personal experience, because I have happened to know a lot of people with heavy anxiety and antisocial behavior, or not really desperately, like a phobia of being around people and being around crowds. And that Barkley's behavior did remind me of that. I think the episode did get it right, that they tend to be late and stumble and stutter and stuff, and just be so incredibly, almost like hyperventilate, and like have complete anxiety when they're just around a lot of people and where they're forced to do any public speaking. So I believe this episode, but I think that's a very valid comparison. Anyway, we'll get into the next comment, which is Greg Marley. This is an enjoyable classic with a good lesson, but I only realized the other day that this was Barkley's first appearance. I think the opening scene is funnier when you already know who Barkley is, because he's shy, retiring nature makes the contrast with his big shot blowhard holodeck persona is more humorous. And as an A-Team fan as a kid, it was fun to discover Murdoch on TNG too. I do like Barkley a lot, so to me this episode is just one more example of how Season 3 kicked things into high gear. Well, Greg Marley, I actually did watch this episode in your intended order, because, as I mentioned many times before, I saw Season 4 before I saw Season 3, so I saw the nth degree way before I saw this episode, so I already knew who Barkley was, and so when I saw this, I was like, oh, this is Barkley's backstory. So when I saw the opening scene with them being like all brash and everything, I knew it was an act. So I don't know. I can't really speak to whether or not it's funny, or maybe it is. I found it funny, so maybe it did work. Anyway, as far as the actor, oh God, let me look at Dwight Schultz, I believe the actor's name is, who plays Barkley. It's not accurate for me to say I never watched the A-Team. It's more accurate for me to say I don't remember watching the A-Team, because I was too young. I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I never watched it when I was any older, so I don't know what the A-Team's like. I never watched it. I didn't recognize this actor from the A-Team. I didn't even know that until other people pointed it out. What I did recognize him from was Fat Man and Little Boy. It was a movie that came out in 1989, so very shortly before this episode was made. So he's kind of coming off the heels of that, and I remember really liking that movie when it first came out. And so when I saw this episode, I recognized him from that. I was like, hey, it's the guy from Fat Man and Little Boy. Now, Fat Man and Little Boy was a movie about Oppenheimer. In fact, Dwight Schultz played Oppenheimer in that film. So, in fact, when I went and saw the film, the Christopher Nolan film Oppenheimer, I went back and watched Fat Man and Little Boy. Now, in every way, shape, or form, Oppenheimer is a superior movie to Fat Man and Little Boy. It's got better acting, better cinematography, better script, blah, blah, blah. But I actually kind of like Fat Man and Little Boy better. Or at least there are some aspects, some story aspects I found more interesting. I think Oppenheimer sort of got too bogged down on the trials and Robert Downey Jr.'s character, which I didn't really care about, and it got a bit out of focus, whereas Fat Man and Little Boy was more focused and it had like a better message, a more clear message to me. So I actually kind of like it better than Oppenheimer, even though objectively speaking, Oppenheimer is clearly the better movie, but still. But you know, Barkley, I'm sorry, is nowhere near good an actor as God, what's his face, Murphy, whatever his name is, who played in Oppenheimer. Anyway, Cillian Murphy, is that his name? Anyway, I don't know. Next comment, it's from Norman Buchwald, who says, the episode that introduces us to Barkley, it's interesting that while similar themed episodes did happen with Riker, with Minuet and Geordi with Leah Brahms, this is the episode that introduces us to Hollow Addiction, which introduces us to yet another nerd. But clearly someone who is puzzling made it all the way with higher ranks and to the Enterprise as Reginald Barkley. Now, the episode does point out how self-doubting, socially awkward individual can still have the smarts, and that is demonstrated by the end. And most Barkley episodes are similar like this, but the hollow addiction problem is very prominent and definitely questionable, not only how he uses the senior members on the ship on his Three Musketeers fantasy, but most notably Troy as the goddess of empathy, and what seems to be implied with what Barkley at least likely desired to do makes this episode just a bit controversial. Yeah, Crusher is like a mother with him arguing he'd be allowed to sleep, but you know what I mean. Still, the humor and how it's handled is its saving grace. Wesley becomes a bully in this episode, enough so it makes me no surprise he's hanging around with Nick Locarno a couple years later. Still, Geordi gets some more merit for being sympathetic and effective as his immediate supervisor, thanks to Guinan, and I always consider this episode above average. In fact, I'll give it 7 broccolis out of 10. Given that, yes, sometimes as Barkley gets too obsessive in his occasional self-degrading rants, I will ask him to muzzle it. So yeah, that's very interesting. I personally wouldn't say that Wesley was being a bully. I think he was being a juvenile 17-year-old, and I think that should fit his character. And so I think he's acting in character. I don't think he meant to be a bully. Like, he never directly bullied Barkley, so I think that's going too far to say he was being a bully. He was just being juvenile. But yes, good point about the goddess of empathy. That is very sketchy. Some very sketchy shit Mr. Broccoli is doing. But the whole point about hollow addiction, like, I think Geordi does use that term in this episode, and I missed it before, but it's all because it's very quick. He doesn't really focus on it. Like, they don't make a big deal out of it. So I don't know. I get the impression that they treat hollow addiction as something like, I don't know, something minor, something like someone who watches too much porn or watches too much TV, or well, not the obsessive amount of porn, because I know that can be a real life problem, but or, you know, someone who spends too much time watching TV, or someone who doesn't go outside enough. I don't know, not like a huge, like, alcohol or a huge addiction, like as someone who's like very unhealthily addicted to porn, or very unhealthily like social anxiety and refusing to go out, who's a shut-in who refuses to leave his house. Like, I don't think they treat it to that extreme. I think they treat it as a problem, but nothing that major. In fact, I think the Voyager episode, when they bring up oh, you're having a relapse of holo addiction. I think in that episode they're treating it more like alcoholism, which I think does not necessarily in continuity with how they treat it in this episode. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, I hear a lot of hate to this episode, but I think it's pretty good. The episode introduced Barclay, who would go on to be a recurring character, and I'll admit there are some hilarious scenes in this episode, especially the scene with Troy in a toga costume calling out to Barclay. Also, I think it does a good job addressing the issue with people being made more comfortable in spending time in the fantasy world instead of in the real world. I think this is a problem that is even bigger in modern times, such as with technology in video games and VR. And the ending to this episode where Barclay ends his fantasy holo program was pretty satisfying, as he was shown to have a character's development. So not the best episode, but a good one, and certainly not one of the worst of season 3. So my rating is a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much, Ricky, for your comment. So next, or last comment, is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, I'm torn about this episode. While I find broccoli an I said broccoli again, sorry. I fucking keep doing it. What the fuck? It's Wesley's fault. Anyway, let me start again. I'm torn about this episode where I find Barclay an increasingly annoying character as I get older. I recognize enough of him in myself to feel uncomfortable and squirm, but how the hell did he manage to get into Starfleet, let alone pass all the examinations? He seems to want women either swooning over him or being his mother, which is particularly worrying as this episode was written by a woman. I can imagine Barclay on the Cerritos being nerdy with Rutherford and Tendi. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. If Barclay is yet another Star Trek's attempt to represent people with a disability, they're doing a piss poor job of it. This episode lacks a sense of urgency when the ship controls aren't responding. 3 holographic musketeers out of 10. Well, very appropriate rating if you're giving musketeers. Anyway, I don't know. I kind of think this was a good portrayal of social anxiety and antisocial behavior, or people who just have anxiety around being around people. I do recognize a little bit of that in myself as well, but I have known people with more extreme cases of that, and it does seem to ring true to what I've encountered. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Anyway, thank you, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Holo Pursuits out of 10 is going to be a 7, very good. Now, I'm still torn, like right up to the bitter end, I was torn between a 7 and a 6, and I kept going, is this a 7 or a 6? Is this a 7 or a 6? Kind of wanted to give it a 6, being honest, because of the shit ending, which I think they didn't resolve what they should have resolved. I would have liked to actually seen him in counseling with Troy at the end, rather than having that bullshit hologram thing. And also the whole holodeck thing, I think is a bit iffy. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it was a bit just, especially when it started, when he was like in the 10th Ward and being like, yeah, I'm sick of you, Riker. Like, that shit was dumb. I'm sorry, it was. I mean, honestly, and this might feel weird, but I actually think the 3 Musketeer bullshit wasn't as dumb. But anyway, wasn't a huge fan of that, but I decided to go with the 7 just because I love the character story with Geordi. I love how Geordi made friends with Barclay. I love the journey that he went on. I love that Picard stuck up for this crew member that he didn't even know, and was just like, on principle, no, we're not just going to give this problem to someone else. We are going to help this person. And how Geordi does help them the right way by boosting his confidence. Not by yelling at him, not by grating on him, like that doesn't help anyone, but by boosting his confidence, by becoming his friend, makes him become a better person. It was sort of like the shining light that saved him. And I love that story. I think that story is beautiful. That story worked. Therefore, I'm going to give it a 7 instead of a 6, but it is a very weak 7. Because otherwise, I don't think... Like, I would definitely, by no means would I call this one of the best episodes of Season 3. In fact, I was thinking I might call it one of the worst. But I think the character's story with Geordi saves it from being one of the worst. So, yeah, 7 out of 10 from me. So that is it for my review of Hollow Pursuits. So let me just bring up my schedule if I can find it. Okay, so coming up next on Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters to release my revisited For the Most Toys. The episode where Data dies, but of course we know he's not dead. I already did a review for this, so I'll be revisiting my review over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters. Then on Monday, I'll be back here on my main channel with a new video for my top 10 Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode soundtracks, where I count down my favorite music. The episode I think has the best music from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then on Wednesday, I'll be staying on my main channel with a new review for Sarek, the Next Generation episode. And then on Saturday, staying on my main channel with another new review for Menage a Troy. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to do videos on Star Trek and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.